Computer. Okay, let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to this month's meeting. People will still be strolling in as we go through it. I'm going to start the meeting with a very short presentation on the group itself, especially for those folks who are new to the group. This page that you can see describes our group mission. Again, it's everything about Microsoft Azure. Okay, development, infrastructure, or operations, whatever. What you name it, we cover it. Okay? We were founded in 2013 with only 4 members. Today we have, actually the slide is out of date already. We have over 2,600 registered members already. And we're growing, okay? We always could use more members, so tell your friends and coworkers about us. Big news, okay? The group, the Nashville Azure group, is going global. Now, when we thought about making the group a global group, we realized that we were already a global group. We have members, a lot of members, like within that 2,600, a lot of members that are outside of the Nashville area. So we've picked up a lot of members in the years, and we're gonna promote to that approach. We're gonna start spreading the word. If you want to, if you have social networking and you want to help us out, help us spread the word that there's now a new global group in town. Okay, because of our going global, we've decided we're also going to only meet online in the foreseeable future. Okay, so that's the we're going to meet online. We want to start having topics, lining up topics for next year. We think we'll probably not have a meeting in December because it's too close to Christmas, but we will start scheduling presentations, meetings starting in January. And if you have a topic that you want to get us to cover, let us know. I always give preference to the people that actually attend the meetings. They're the ones that deserve the choice in terms of what topics we cover. And also, if you want to give a presentation, let us know what you're interested in. Okay. A little bit about the board of directors. I'm the founder and president, and I'm an Azure Solutions Architect. Roger Dahlman is a co-founder. He started back with those 4 members. He was one of the 4, and he's an enterprise architect at Deloitte. And of course, Tim Warner, who's our presenter today. He's also vice president of the group, and you must know about Tim. If you're doing anything with Azure, because he's very well known. He's a Pluralsight book and course author, and that's his website link over there if you want to find out more about him. And Jack Hagler from Vaco is our sponsor as well, and he's been our sponsor from the beginning. Back when we met on site, he provided refreshments for the group. When that stopped, when we started meeting online, he started to pay for the for the Zoom subscription that we use, so we didn't have to pay for it ourselves. Okay, and again, as I said, this is the list of sponsors. It's Microsoft pays for our meeting news, Vaco pays for our Zoom subscription. And just a plug for Jack, for Jack at Vaco, if you're interested in finding a job, that's what Jack does. He's a recruiter for Vaco, and he's helped a number of people find employment. So just a plug for Jack. He wasn't expecting that, but I thought I'd give him the plug. Okay. Also, we do have an opportunity if your company is interested in a little publicity and you want to spend 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of some meeting. We'll give you that opportunity. We'd like in exchange to get some stuff we can raffle off, either gift cards or T-shirts or whatever you want us, whatever you'd give us to raffle off. Okay. So if you're interested in doing that, if your company's interested, contact Roger Dahlman and he'll work it out with you. Okay? Just to plug, and again, I should have had this on. I should have had the URL on the main page, but this is our YouTube channel. As you can see, we have a ton of content out there now, and we'll add this one to this recording from this meeting after we within a day or 2. We'll get that up there. So let's get down to it. All right, we'll talk about tonight's meeting. Tonight's meeting is generative AI from zero to hero. Tim is going to make us all an expert tonight. Okay. Tim is an IT pro, principal architect at Pluralsight. He's worked for Microsoft. He's worked as a technical trainer, and he's a vice president of the group, of course, and he's currently focusing on this particular area. So this is a great opportunity for us to hear it from one of the experts. And with that, I'm going to turn control over to Tim. Okay.
All right, let me get to the correct screen here.
Okay. What's going on here? Whoops. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
Looking good, Bill?
Yes. Yeah, I see it.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is going to be a real bare knuckle kind of presentation. As you see, I'm going directly into demo mode. I don't have a slide deck. I have some ones from past presentations. If you really want to know, just go out to github.com/Timothy Warner. And if you look at my repos, especially the most recently accessed ones, you can find some PowerPoint stuff on generative AI, on OpenAI and ChatGPT, GitHubCopilot, all of that kind of stuff. But what you're looking at right now is a gist file that I created for this session. I put the short link in the Zoom chat, but as you can see, it's timw.info/hero. And what I've done with this gist file, it's pretty bare bones, like I mentioned. There's contact information, and then just the major touch points that I want to transmit with you over the next hour. I really want you to leave this session with a much clearer picture of generative AI in general, the OpenAI stack in particular, and how that ties into Microsoft Azure. That's really important to me because in my career of a couple dozen years now, I've never seen a tech move this fast in a destructive way. It's breaking and steamrolling people and things as it goes along. So it's incredibly fast moving. So most of us, I would say, don't really know what the heck we're doing. But we need a starting point, and that is understanding what's the difference, for instance, between GPT and ChatGPT. What's the difference between OpenAI and Azure OpenAI? You know what I'm saying? What is an embedding? I hear people talking about that. Some touch points here. It's critical that we go over. So we'll be hitting a lot of the links that are on this gist file. I also am here to answer every question that you have. So I asked Bill if there's any questions that bubble up in the chat, if he'd recite them to me. I'm just on one monitor tonight. Long story, but my life, professional and personal life, is kind of like a game of Yahtzee with the shaker cup. It's kind of upside down at the moment. So there's just one screen, but I will answer all your questions, all right? I think the first thing is let's do a drive-by, or maybe a flyby would be a better way to look at it. Generative AI from the bird's eye perspective here, and we're going to be paying attention to the OpenAI stack and Azure OpenAI. I know that there's other players in this game, notably Google and Amazon, but as you probably know, OpenAI had an at least 9-month head start, so they're definitely, in my biased opinion, the leaders in this space. I'm sure that the competition will reasonably catch up. It's just a question of time. The good news is I think the high-level things we're going to be talking about tonight would apply to any large language model or LLM. And that's certainly the case with GPT. From a top-level perspective, how would you define generative AI, actually? Probably should just stop for a moment and do that. I like to say that when it comes to this subject, if you ask 5 people that question, you'll probably get 7 responses back, because it's so volatile. I just look at it this way. The AI piece is the software that is replicating aspects of human thinking, human cognition. And to put that in more human terms yet, OpenAI calls ChatGPT your personal chief of staff. And I think that metaphor is apt because I'm using ChatGPT every day in my professional and personal lives. And wait a minute, I just said my lives turned upside down. Could there be a causal connection? Just kidding. There isn't. But I've been using it every day and really kicking the tires with it. And I just come back to something that Bill and I were talking about before we started tonight's session, that this generative AI thing is definitely a watershed, industry changing situation, much like the internet was in the World Wide Web in the mid 90s. It feels very similar. All right. So OpenAI is the company that makes these large language models. The AI models are called generative because you're getting back new, novel data. And GPT is equally adept at generating text, source code, images, and audio now. And the list is just going to keep on growing over time. It's a multimodal large language model, or LLM. It's running in the Microsoft Azure cloud. The good thing about ChatGPT is that it's a software as a service app. So you can either use it for free or you can get a paid plus subscription and unlock all the good stuff, really. Or if you're a business, you can buy licenses for ChatGPT Enterprise. That's what I'm actually signed into here. The chat interface looks pretty much identical to the ChatGPT Plus and ChatGPT Free. But again, you need to remember that this is a front-end application that OpenAI made that simply takes your prompt, your input, sends it to a REST API endpoint. It's called the chat completion endpoint, based on one of these model versions, with 4 being the current latest one, 3.5 being the old standard. It was a heck of a lot cheaper to use, but it's nowhere near as robust and smart as GPT-4. We're sending requests to and from those services, and the ChatGPT app abstracts all the technicalities away from us. So you don't have to worry about things like context length, how long ChatGPT will remember the conversation. You certainly don't have to worry about tokens. Oh boy, these responses from the AI are really big. That's going to cost us a lot of money. Now, ChatGPT is meant originally just as a technical preview, but now so many people are using it both in personal and professional lives. You have this distinction, this ChatGPT Plus for individuals, ChatGPT Enterprise for businesses. The Enterprise version has some governance guardrails that you can do. Things like, maintaining payment for your whole company so you can centralize spend and report on spend, but also just centralized identity and policies and all that kind of stuff goes into that enterprise product. Okay. So that is the front door. That's how I got turned on to generative AI. It was the fall of last year, and my 13-year-old daughter actually turned me on to it. Now she's very skeptical of it. It's interesting how the worm has turned in less than a year, whereas I'm all over it. As a business, you're thinking, first of all, at least this is what I hear when I'm interacting with customers, clients, and students, is should I consume the APIs from OpenAI or should I go with Microsoft because there's this Azure OpenAI service or something like that? And the answer is, yeah, that's right. So your question 0 would be, based on your business needs and what you want to do with that AI, what kind of generative text, code, images, audio do you want? Do you have a whole bunch of translations that you want to do at scale? Do you have a whole bunch of input that you want to do a sentiment analysis on to classify positive, neutral, negative? Do you have number crunching and data analysis and all that kind of stuff to do? The GPT is a really smart model and pretty much can handle any business or personal task you want to throw at it, really. Now, I'm going to be really candid here and just straight across the board, but understand I'm just speaking for myself and this is just my own opinions. But at this point, let me adjust my browser. Microsoft is having some issues, number one, with their capacity in the Azure data centers, because they have not only the Azure workloads, but they're hosting all of the OpenAI stuff as well. And then there's Azure OpenAI Service on top of that. So last I checked, they actually they closed the gate where you had to get on a waiting list to even have the Azure OpenAI Service enabled in your Azure subscription. And then you also had to get on another waiting list if you wanted to create models using GPT-4 rather than GPT-3.5. Not sure if that's relaxed. I hope so. But what you're seeing here on the screen is the Azure OpenAI Service, which is Microsoft's own interpretation of the OpenAI GPT model. GPT, by the way, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And we don't have the time, and it's really not necessary to geek out about machine learning and how the model is trained. I mean, I'm happy to discuss that if that's what you all want, for sure. But practically speaking, you've got this model, which is basically some files on a disk and a server that, based on just this iterative scanning against enormous data sets, GPT has been trained on the public World Wide Web over the last X number of years. Now, in a case of it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, OpenAI publishes the name of their spider bot so you can exempt your personal or business websites from being scanned by OpenAI. It's just a robots.txt edition. I think their bot is called GPT bot, logically enough. OpenAI is as transparent as they can be. They're in kind of a sticky situation in some ways. Well, that's a true statement across the board. But what I was thinking of is they have both for-profit and non-for-profit sections. And they adhere to responsible AI principles that they and Microsoft bounce off each other, etc. But at the same time, because they have the profit, and GPT is not an open source model, you should know that. It's a proprietary black box, and we just get access to the endpoints, to the API listeners. So they have an interest to keep their trade secret secret. So I found with real world discussions with generative AI, it's kind of spinning your wheels and unnecessary to contemplate their back end. Focus instead on your business requirements and optimizing your prompts, it seems to me. I think I'm yammering off into the weeds too much. Bill, are there any questions I can answer at this point? If not, I'll just keep on trucking.
No, there aren't yet.
Okay, all right. Well, any questions you have, please feel free to surface them. So I mentioned ChatGPT, and I mentioned Microsoft has hosted their own OpenAI models. I had mentioned I was going to be candid. I find that, and it's probably because of capacity issues, the Azure OpenAI service is trailing behind what OpenAI themselves are doing big time. Now, you probably know that Microsoft invested well north of $10 billion in OpenAI, and they've got a near exclusive partnership with OpenAI. Azure is hosting the OpenAI infrastructure, all of that, but OpenAI is still doing their own thing. So really, the top three choices walking away from this session would be, do I just want to get right into Gen AI as an end user? I would look at ChatGPT. As a business, we want to investigate how generative AI might enrich our products, our services, our documentation. Your question is, are you bound to Azure and Microsoft? And can you live with that gap, that feature gap between what OpenAI is doing directly and when it bubbles up in Azure? And if yes, you know that as well as I do, that Azure has a huge library of security controls, cost management controls. You get a lot of benefit going that way. The third way would be to work directly with OpenAI and work with their APIs. So this would be a question, or an answer rather, to application developers. I would say anybody who's interested in GPT, you should bookmark platform.openai.com. It's called the OpenAI platform site. And you sign in with your account. You can browse the docs and everything anonymously, but you'll want to sign in with your account. And even more to the point, you'll want a payment method so you can start consuming the APIs directly. So if we look here on the platform site under capabilities, you can learn about each of those endpoints. The two main ways that you can make GPT smart on your internal line of business data are to either run fine-tuning jobs against your own copy of GPT, and or you can create an embedding. And just to give the Cliff's Notes distinction between those, Fine tuning would be, for instance, where you've got a whole bunch of PDFs and Excel workbooks and Power BI books, and you want to ingest those into your own GPT so that you and your colleagues and whomever can benefit from that domain specific intelligence. Well, that's what fine tuning does. It'll grab all those binary and text files and basically create a word cloud. It'll convert all the text into what are called tokens, word fragments. And then it'll create, I envision it like looking at the starry sky at night, a web of these different interconnected points where word fragments that have a higher correlation are closer to each other, and words that are distantly related are farther away. That's the neural network that the GPT large language model uses anyway. So when you do a fine tuning or an embedding, embedding is a cool name because I can visualize when you do an embedding, you take your own source data. It has to be in a specified format, JSON lines format, JSON-L. But it might be your knowledge base, your brand names, your locations, all your internal stuff. And you create that map, that constellation of tokens, and then you embed that into your own GPT model. So those are just...
Sorry, Tim. There are some comments in the chat. Karen Thomas said, if we have time, I would like to get into the training process. Karen, you could give us a little more detail about, which training process you're interested in.
I suspect she's talking about what I just finished talking about, actually, because the two ways that you train GPT are either fine-tuning or embeddings, or both. In those cases, you wind up instructing OpenAI to give you your own copy of the GPT model, and then you throw your own data at it. Embeddings would be JSON lines data. Fine-tuning would be document data. And then you run queries. You send your prompts into that instance. And let me go further with my demo, come to think of it.
Okay.
There's a playground here.
Just one quick comment. Someone
Sure.
wanted to know, would someone share the GitHub link, which Tim showed in the beginning? I'm not sure which link, that screen's gone by, so I don't know what that is.
It's early in the chat. It's timw.info/hero.
Good.
timw.info/hero. And that'll take you to the GitHub gist that contains all of these sites I'm showing you here, basically. And remember that you have the recording to follow up on, and my contact deets are in that gist anyway. What's an assistant? Well, in the playground, well, that's another question. What I meant to say was, what's a playground? The OpenAI playground here is an opportunity for you to interact with one of these APIs. Now, you might have seen the OpenAI announcements. They had their first conference last week, Dev Day, and they blew a whole bunch of businesses away who were doing their own custom GPT development. Now you create your own custom GPTs with a couple mouse clicks or a couple HTTP requests, So this is really new days stuff. I actually want to switch this out of assistants and just go to the chat endpoint. Now, again, another point of confusion potentially. I don't want to skew too far over on the developer side and so forth. But as a developer, when you're interacting with these different endpoints, like there's the DALL-E endpoints for image generation, for text and source code, there's the GPT-3.5 Turbo, the GPT-4 and GPT-4 Turbo, the brand new model. So that's another thing, a set of things to think about, which model is best for your workload. But as you can see here in the playground, I'm able to now craft some queries and send them to the model. Right here, I can choose from the list from a number of off-the-shelf GPTs, as well as if I show more models. I thought I had some that I had trained, but any that you have embeddings for and that you've fine-tuned, they'll show up in the playground list. So this is a great spot for just about anybody to interact with the AI directly. Now, here's an important pro tip for getting the best out of GPT. Use system messages. Now, what the heck's a system message? A system message is where you role play with the AI. Let's say that we were going to do some Python development and we needed to learn how to do some OpenAI stuff using Python, and we know nothing about OpenAI. So we're going to start from scratch. When you send a prompt to a large language model with no system message, you're leaving it up to the AI to make assumptions. So it may talk to you in too elementary a way or too complex of a way. So system message, we can say, you are an expert Python developer and OpenAI specialist. I am a professional developer, so you can go into depth. You see what I'm doing here with the system prompt? And this is useful even in a line of business application where you're canning your prompts, because the system part of the prompt allows you to instruct the AI how to behave, how to consider you, reduce the number of assumptions it makes, and hopefully give you the best possible response. The user prompt or the user message is the actual question. Please create a Python script that sends a hello world type chat message to the OpenAI chat completions API. So this is the ask. And you might have seen, blog articles and beyond talking about prompt engineering, earn $1 million a year and all this. Have any of you actually met somebody who's working as a prompt engineer? They appear to be a legitimate unicorn at this point. Supposedly, you can earn mad money doing prompt engineering. I sound cynical. It's legit. It really is. Question?
Yeah, there was a request. I'm not sure there's an easy answer to this one, but what are some of the use cases you could present to a business that is hesitant or not sure about AI? I think that's more of a philosophical question.
Yeah, let me pause to answer that, and I'll give you an example out of my day job. By day, I work at Pluralsight as a staff author. And one of many generative AI projects that we're doing, I'm not busting NDA with this, by the way. Of course, I'm highly respectful of NDA, is we're thinking about, well, for these video courses that could be from like 30 minutes to many hours long, how can we make it easier to create assessment questions, do executive summaries? This is stuff that normally you would hire a contractor for and pay them a fair amount of money. So with GPT, using crafty system and user prompting, we can literally upload a transcript of the text from the video course and ask the AI to do all of the above. A good example of how AI can make really short work of what otherwise could take days or weeks. But you also see the dark side, don't you? That's why I hesitated. The destructive nature here is this means that I would imagine Pluralsight's going to hire fewer contractors because the AI is generating the summaries and the assessment questions and all of that. It's reality. So anyway, let me submit this prompt here. And so the playground allows you to iterate your prompting. What I was saying a couple minutes ago, I want to pick up on, is prompt engineering is starting to develop a vocabulary. So you might have heard terms like zero-shot prompting and few-shot versus many. Basically, I rationalize it like this. Zero-shot is a message in a bottle. You send in your question, what is the meaning of life, and everything in it. And the response, or completion as it's technically called, that comes back from the API says 42, as it should, right? That's a zero-shot thing where you didn't need to provide, bare minimum context with no examples. You get your result, you're happy. Few-shot is where you start to expand your user prompt to do examples. Few, what constitutes a few? 1, 2, 3 examples, but you're modeling. And again, my big argument for that is that you're reducing the assumptions that the AI makes. Let's see if we can recraft a prompt here and use the few-shot method. So what's it given us? We asked it to give us some Python. It looks really ugly in the playground. Remember, ChatGPT is a finished SaaS application. And so OpenAI added all of the good old JavaScript widgets to show code really nicely where you can copy out of it and all of that stuff. Now, I do notice it's asking us to put our API key in plain text. See, that would be something we could come back with here. So if I want to add a message, I could say, please fix the exposed API key in your code. Now, I want to say some technical details. Again, with my goal is you leaving leaving this session a lot smarter on the options at the high level, but also you have some practical stuff that you can actually kick the tires on now. Particularly if you create an OpenAI account, you can use ChatGPT free or buck up for the plus. I think the plus is $20 USD a year. I mean, for me, it's super worth it, but your mileage may vary. Long story short, I recrafted my prompt a little bit. And did you notice that I didn't have to repeat myself? That you can continue to interact with the assistant and it remembers what you said and what it said. Now, there's some important stuff to know about that. It's called context length, and you can look at it as a sliding window. The longer GPT's context length, the more conversation it can hold in memory. Now, I put memory in air quotes because technically it's very low tech what's happening behind the scenes. If you know how to do REST API development, you know that every request and response is message in a bottle. It's freestanding. So you might think, well, how can ChatGPT remember a conversation when every request is brand new and it has to include everything? That's what happens. In fact, I should be able to show you the JSON here if I can remember which control to use. Let me think about that. But yeah, to show the JSON of this conversation that we're having with the chat completion endpoint, basically there's a messages array. Actually, I have an example I can show you in VS Code. Let's look here. And just pay attention here on line 7 down to line 12. In the response, there'll be an array called messages that contains all of the previous prompts and completions. And notice that the role key can be system if you did a system prompt. User would be the end user, and assistant is the AI, it's GPT. So it's very low tech. And the idea is when you've reached the end of your context length, like 8K is about 8,000 tokens. What happens when you reach that maximum? Well, it's like a circular log file. The oldest entries drop off the list, and you might find that GPT starts showing some signs of amnesia at that point. Now, one of the announcements, my favorite of the announcements that OpenAI made last week at their Dev Day conference, is that now they've got GPT-4 Turbo with, I think it's a 128K context. And you might think, well, big deal. Well, when you think that ChatGPT Plus, I believe it's a 4K context, and now it's 128 that's available, you can see the rapid change that's going on. 128K tokens, I don't know how many pages, that would be several hundred pages worth in a book. That's a potentially long-running conversation. And actually another announcement that OpenAI made is the idea where you can actually persist conversations, even if they go past the token length. You can basically restructure the JSON to take the previous chunk and put it like in an archive section. And then you've got your active messages array that's building in your active context, if that makes sense. So again, just the staggering innovation that those OpenAI people are doing, it just blows me away. It totally blows me away. Any questions, comments, concerns, curiosities? Again, you don't have to worry. I'm sorry, did somebody speak? No, okay.
I was muted. Sorry, I was muted. There is a question related to prompt engineering. One of our members wanted to know if there are any courses or certifications available for that.
Yes, the company I work for, Pluralsight, has a couple. They're pretty high level. but they're better than nothing. The most comprehensive one I was just made aware of yesterday, and it's a Coursera course. I might have it included on the handout. Let me quickly check.
Okay.
Let me go to, again, that URL is timw.info/hero. Let's see here. Yeah, here it is. Under prompt engineering, I have a link to this ChatGPT prompt engineering course. It's taught by a professor here in Nashville, where I am. In fact, I'm going to be meeting him before too long. But it looks like a really solid table of contents. I haven't started it yet, unfortunately. Okay, so let me get back to pick up where we left off here. So we were poking around in the playground a little bit, and I had wanted to show you the tokenizer. Again, that's something that you probably don't care about if you're using ChatGPT because it's a finished application. But if you're going to be doing real development with the API, you absolutely need to be aware of how much it's going to cost you, because that consumption is how you pay. If you go with OpenAI, you can go into your user settings. Again, they changed this layout completely as of last week, but you can see your API usage. You have to provide a payment method, of course. You get like a $5 USD starting credit. And then after that, you'll need to have your own payment method. And then you'll need to generate an API key in order to authenticate your code to OpenAI and to make sure that it honors all of your requests. Basically, the pricing is very similar between OpenAI and Microsoft. It boils down to you're paying a flat fee per 1,000 tokens. But note well, you're paying not only for the completions, which is the generated output, but you're also paying for your prompts. And both of those factor into what you pay. Now, you get about a 50% discount on the prompt part because, after all, that's not original. You're providing the prompt. But that, again, it's a similar motif. You can go to the OpenAI pricing page, or you can go to the Azure OpenAI Service pricing page. It also depends which version of the model you're using. GPT-3.5 Turbo is dirt cheap, but it's fast, but it's nowhere near as comprehensive as GPT-4. GPT-4, up until last week, was a lot more expensive than GPT-3.5 and a lot slower, but miles ahead in terms of what it can do. Remember that GPT is multimodal, so it can generate source code, it can generate an image. I can, for instance, come back over to ChatGPT, and I just want to keep stuff moving on the screen. And you might have noticed if you sign in regularly and you're using a paid version, there's that little detail. Instead of having to create separate conversations that enable or disable different plugins and capabilities, now there's a unified interface. So for instance, I can start up a GPT-4 conversation and I can shift different contexts. I can say, for example, generate a piece of line art that symbolizes a neural network. This request is going to be captured by its DALL-E integration, and DALL-E is the API that does image generation. You probably knew that. While we're waiting for this, I can switch to a conversation I was having earlier today, where what did I ask it to do? I did data analysis. This is something that if you're willing to use ChatGPT, I strongly suggest you take a look at. It's called the Advanced Data Analysis plugin. And again, you don't have to enable it now. As long as you have access to GPT-4, it's included. It's called Analysis. And what this plugin does, it's a cloud-based Python interpreter. I don't know if it's probably a Docker container. I doubt it's a full virtual machine. But what you're able to do, you can upload data in a number of different formats. And the use case here would be any kind of exploratory data analysis that you're looking to do. And boy, when I worked at Microsoft, I really could have used this because they're all about the quantitative reports, you know what I mean? And so what I did is uploaded an Excel file that was just a sample collection of sales from a fictional superstore. And I did some few-shot prompting. I said, please read this data set file and perform the following actions. And what I normally do, there's no syntax that unlocks GPT. You see different things. I have perfectly fine results when I use soft returns like Shift Enter. And I just use the markdown unordered list syntax, as you can see, hyphen space. And GPT never has any trouble understanding what I want it to do. I want it to briefly describe the contents of the file. I want to show the first few rows. I want a detailed analysis of just the 2016 data in the spreadsheet. And then what's the best approach to create a summary report for my colleagues because it's due in the next 30 minutes. This is powerful stuff. And it's one of those things where I don't even think it's available in the API. I think at this point, all of the plugins are tied to the ChatGPT UI. Now, if you're interested in geeky details, a plugin is simply a REST API that you nest inside of ChatGPT, and it can call out to do its own API stuff. But the technology that OpenAI is using is called function calling. So eventually, I don't think it's available quite yet, but we should be able to consume the advanced data analysis plugin, the Bing web search plugin, and third-party plugins programmatically by using this function calling capability in the API. All right, so that's just something to look forward to. So here's the results. The ChatGPT is happy to give me all of this analysis, and you can have it create pretty pictures. I had it create a Word document. That's something else you can do. You can have it generate outputs. So it can do a bunch of data manipulation for you. It can create visualizations, surface insights, and then have it generate a PowerPoint for you. So that's called the Advanced Data Analysis, or ADA plugin. And that's part of ChatGPT 4. At last check, it's not yet available in the API, unfortunately. What are some other things you might want to know about the API if you are going to do programmatic work? Well, I mentioned that you'll use an API key, because fundamentally, what I tell developers is if you're already proficient with REST API work, then all you have to learn is anything that's domain specific to OpenAI, because they're purely garden variety RESTful services. Simple as that. They use a bearer token, and you pass in your API key, and the payload is always JSON. It's just straight down the middle REST API RESTful services. Now, I mentioned that when you submit a prompt to GPT, that prompt, it's almost like I envision it skeet shooting. It's, a clay pigeon, and it bursts apart, because that input comes into the API as JSON, and it blows it into fragments or tokens. So you definitely want to be aware of tokens when you're paying in a consumption model here. So this page is platform.openai.com/tokenizer. And it's basically, it's kind of a Mickey Mouse app. Oh, I take that back, because it looks like it's been updated to GPT-4. Up until the last time I was here, it was only showing GPT-3, and it was kind of Mickey Mouse. Now it looks pretty realistic. The idea is that you can put any of your text here, and it doesn't have to be plain text. It can be JSON. I'm just going to grab this Python script, for example, and I'm going to throw it into the tokenizer so you can see what happens when GPT grabs that input and blows it apart out of the JSON. Well, it busts it down into these fragments. Now, you should know that each model has its own encoding. And you can actually get into the tokenizer stuff programmatically. It's easiest if you're a Python developer, because you'll find that OpenAI has by far the most robust support for Python, Node.js following a second. But there's a Python library called TikToken, TikToken. And that's a great way for you to evaluate tokenization and costs without burning up real API calls to the service over the internet. TikToken is going to be all client side, you see? So that's something to think about. So each model version has its own encoding, its own way of creating tokens. Don't try to rationalize, oh, it must be a half a word. I've tried and failed, and there's no seeming rhyme or reason to how the tokens are generated. Now, what I want you to see on screen now is that I'm paying for what look like empty tokens. And notice that when I'm indenting code here in this Python, I'm actually paying for that. So an important design goal for any OpenAI developer is going to be to think about how can you minify your prompts and your application as much as possible to minimize cost. And that's actually a book idea that I'm incubating right now. It's on the language of prompt engineering. I've been telling to anybody who will listen that rather than get all hung up in what is machine learning, how do neural networks work, that's all abstracted away from us. That's on the other side of the cloud, the proverbial cloud. Instead, how do you actually use this stuff? We programmed GPT using our prompts, and we're using natural language and maybe some source code and maybe some audio and maybe an image, but you get the general idea. The quality of the result is directly proportional to the quality of your prompt. So I just want you to see that tokenization here, that we want to think about minification as an application developer for sure. You might want to think about moderation, stripping out or flagging comments that might have hate speech, etc. You've got a couple options for that kind of stuff. Both OpenAI and Microsoft on the Azure OpenAI side make use or make available their moderation API, but you can also customize the moderation API with your own disallowed words, for lack of a better term. You see what I'm saying? What you'll find in practice going along is that you're really forced to use the responsible AI principles. So you'll note that in the handout I have for you, that gist, I lead off linking to OpenAI's and Microsoft's responsible AI principles. There are things like accountability, transparency, and that. And I feel for OpenAI because they want to be transparent, but they have their entire business is staked on the proprietary nature of GPT. So I don't envy their position for sure. Although, well, I'll leave that alone. Any other questions, Bill? Anything you see in the chat that you want to surface?
No, that's pretty it. Pretty much it. Someone posted the YouTube channel link there for anyone who wants it.
Yeah, I want to continue to add value here in our last few minutes together. I've already created an instance of the Azure OpenAI service, and I just want to quickly jump into their, it's called an Azure OpenAI Studio. You might know that particularly for the big data services, Microsoft will create a separate user-specific portal, and that's no different for Azure OpenAI. And the idea here is we've got the playground where you can address each endpoint. And I've mentioned a couple times that you want to stay with ChatGPT or the chat completions endpoint. Basically, the completions endpoint, OpenAI is actually calling it legacy now. I would devote your development work full steam ahead, primarily on the chat completion endpoint. Now, historically, the idea is that OpenAI thought customers wanted separate endpoints. Chat has all of the conversational wrapping. Hey, how you doing? I'm glad to help you. And it also has that pseudo session state where it builds the messages array and keeps previous responses. That's the chat completion endpoint. The completions endpoint is where it's just the facts. You send in a prompt, you get just the bare completion, and it'll obey anything you do in terms of temperature and stop words and all of that. But there's none of the extra cruft that you can get with chat. Well, really, it's shaking out practically that OpenAI is like standardized on the chat completion endpoint, and they've marked the completions endpoint as being deprecated. Now, DALL-E currently is a separate endpoint, but it gets confusing because as you saw, in fact, I should go back to and see what our new image looks like. We can instruct GPT-4 to create images just as easily as we can have it create source code or text. Again, generative AI. And again, moving really fast. My daughter, my 13-year-old, is an artist, so she's really offended by generative AI because of, intellectual is this taking so long creating an image? It should have given me a couple candidate images by now. Well, you might have noticed capacity happening. This morning when I started work at my day job, I needed ChatGPT and I couldn't get in for an hour or so due to capacity. But anyway, oh, there we go. So there's my neural network. This is DALL-E 3 and it's pretty stunning. And if you're an artist that uses physical media or whatever, should you feel threatened? My response is two or threefold to this issue of generative AI and intellectual property theft and that kind of stuff. Number one, I asked and pinned OpenAI to the wall, so to speak. I wanted an answer to the question, who owns your art? If you're going to generate an art piece in DALL-E, does OpenAI have any claims on it? If I say, give me a graphic in the realm or in the spirit of Salvador Dali, and it does that, is there any implication? OpenAI said no, and they've got it on their public website, that you own all generated output, source code, text, images, audio. It's yours 100%. And yet another announcement from last week is that Microsoft and OpenAI are doing this thing called Copyright Shield. It's kind of a corny name. I don't remember exactly what it is. But the idea is if somebody comes after you where you've used OpenAI results in your app, and somebody comes after you and charges you with IP theft, Microsoft and OpenAI will step in on your behalf. That's their commitment because they're hearing this. There's no question about it. There's a whole bucket load, an overflowing bucket of gray area and legalities and loopholes that are going on with generative AI. There's no question about it. It's just a fact. I know they'll all get ironed out. It's just a question of when and time. So anything else here on Azure? Yeah, I'm back in the Azure OpenAI Studio. Again, the idea is that you create these deployments. You create your own instances of GPT, and then you can develop against those instances. Azure has the same capabilities in terms of fine-tuning and embedding, but notice that there's a graphical overlay. You'll find, as usual, there's an emphasis on making the technology more approachable. I want to go back to some guidance I had at the beginning of the hour that practically speaking, once you peel back the first couple layers of the onion, you're going to find that OpenAI are way out in the vanguard. And Azure OpenAI is really huffing and puffing and working up an enormous sweat trying to catch up, but they're not doing a great job yet. So we're talking pretty basic entry-level stuff going on in Azure OpenAI. But on the other hand, the ability to take your Azure OpenAI service and put it on an Azure private endpoint and have that confidentiality of interacting with your AI completely off internet, that is pretty darn compelling. And OpenAI can't do anything like that. You've got to do some trusting, really. I would say your vendor trust is going to be more when you're working with OpenAI directly than it would be with Microsoft. That's just my opinion and my experience. So wrapping things up, because I see we're at the top of the hour, let me go through that file with you one more time to make sure I didn't miss anything important. Again, timw.info/hero. Contact deets, happy to stay in touch with you. Responsible AI, some links to learn more about ChatGPT and the chat completion endpoint. As far as working directly with OpenAI, there's some helpful links there. I've given you the Coursera link. That's a free online course on prompt engineering. And another is a GitHub project. Some of it's more kind of a parlor trick than anything else, but it's a collection of different prompts that, you know, some can be pretty useful. For instance, if you're between jobs, you could, by using a system prompt, you can role play as a candidate and have the AI interview. I think in closing, if you don't mind me getting on a soapbox here just really briefly, I think it's wonderful that you all are here because we're all in the very early days of this generative AI stuff. And I predict that when Amazon and Google catch up closer, you know they're going to be directly influenced by OpenAI because OpenAI has been at the vanguard here consistently and they surprised everybody last fall. So I would encourage you in the strongest possible terms, even if you have your own objections to generative AI, you're doing your career a huge solid by getting smart on it. Because I'm finding very literally day to day how lucrative and beneficial having that knowledge is, because nobody really knows what they're doing. I've talked to some OpenAI folks and they don't know what the heck's going on. Now, that's not to scare you. It's just, it's the same thing at Microsoft. I had the naive impression when I joined Microsoft, everybody would be able to discuss the Windows kernel. Of course, that's with 150,000 employees. I don't think so. But at any rate, that's it. I'm not interested in keeping anybody out later, but I want to answer any questions you have. So let me stop yapping. And Bill, if there's a question, please, by all means, recite it.
No, there's no more questions. You made everybody an expert.
Well, in summary, I hope, like I said, you have a better high-level view. I'm trying to find that gist. Oh, well. We'll just leave it here. I'm hoping that you're walking away with a clearer top-level picture of some of the initial choices that you'll want to make. The easiest, lowest friction way to get started would be to sign in to chat.openai.com using your Google account or your Microsoft account and start kicking the tires with prompting, being careful not to put anything personal or sensitive in there. Keep that in mind. And you might find that you start to turn to the AI more and more, whereas you turn to Google and Stack Overflow, you'll find, wow, this actually goes out onto the web and does searches for me, and it aggregates the data, puts it in its own words, and gives me a digest that's custom tailored to my learning style. That's pretty insane, isn't it, when you think about productivity? So I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of, and there's everything to gain by getting started with this now. So I hope that you are more empowered than before. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks a lot, Tim. A lot to think about. We'll notify the group about the next meeting, which will probably be in January, since it's Christmas, and the date that we have our normal meeting on is very close to Christmas. So we'll get back with you folks. We'll make sure you're members of the group and stay members so that you can get the announcements. Okay. And Absolutely. With that, I want to thank you all for attending.
Bye.
All right, and take care.